Question 1. Market research demonstrates that clients may sometimes request security personnel to engage in actions that exceed their legal authority. In Ontario, a licensed private security guard is tasked with monitoring a private event. The event organizer approaches the guard and instructs them to forcibly remove a guest who is causing a minor disturbance, stating, "Just get them out of here. I don't care how you do it." The guard knows the guest is not posing an immediate threat of physical harm to anyone. What is the most appropriate course of action for the guard to take in this situation, adhering strictly to the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005? Option A. Ignore the organizer's request and continue with routine patrol duties without addressing the demand. Option B. Politely refuse the organizer's request, explaining that the act prohibits the use of force beyond what is reasonable and necessary for self-defense or the defense of others, and that unauthorized use of force can lead to severe penalties. Option C. Attempt to negotiate with the organizer for a less forceful but still unauthorized method of removing the guest. Option D. Comply with the organizer's request and forcibly remove the guest, as the organizer is the client and has the authority to direct the guard's actions. The correct answer is B. Politely refuse the organizer's request, explaining that the act prohibits the use of force beyond what is reasonable and necessary for self-defense or the defense of others, and that unauthorized use of force can lead to severe penalties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a direct conflict between a client's request and established security protocols, potentially impacting public safety and the security guard's licensing. The guard must navigate the immediate pressure of a client's demand while upholding their legal and ethical obligations under the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. Failure to do so could result in disciplinary action, including license suspension or revocation, and potential legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves politely but firmly refusing the client's request, citing the specific regulatory requirements of the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law and established safety procedures. By explaining that the act prohibits the use of force beyond what is reasonable and necessary for self-defense or the defense of others, and that unauthorized use of force can lead to severe penalties, the guard demonstrates professionalism and a commitment to legal compliance. This upholds the integrity of the security profession and protects both the public and the guard from undue risk. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to comply with the client's request without question. This directly violates the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, which mandates that security guards act within legal boundaries and prohibits the use of excessive or unauthorized force. Such compliance would expose the guard to disciplinary action and potential criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to negotiate a compromise that still involves an action outside of legal parameters. While negotiation is often a valuable skill, it cannot be used to circumvent legal statutes. Any agreement that facilitates or encourages the use of force beyond what is legally permissible under Ontario law is unacceptable and carries the same risks as direct compliance. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the request and continue with routine duties without addressing the client's improper demand. While this avoids direct violation, it fails to address a potentially dangerous situation and could be interpreted as negligence or a lack of professional judgment. It also leaves the client with the impression that their unlawful request might be considered in the future, undermining the guard's authority and the security plan. Professional reasoning. Professionals in the security industry must develop a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a request that conflicts with regulations, the first step is to identify the specific legal or policy violation. Next, the professional should clearly and respectfully communicate the prohibition to the requesting party, referencing the relevant legislation or policy. If the requesting party persists, the professional should escalate the matter to their supervisor or the appropriate authorities, documenting all interactions. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are grounded in law and best practices, safeguarding all parties involved. Question 2. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for specialized security services in the Greater Toronto Area. A client approaches a licensed security guard, requesting immediate assistance in monitoring a private event where alcohol is being served, and the client expresses concern about potential disturbances. The client asks the guard to intervene directly in any altercations that may arise, even if the guard is not currently licensed for such specific intervention duties beyond basic observation and reporting. The guard is licensed as a general security guard in Ontario. What is the most appropriate course of action for the security guard in this situation? Adhering strictly to the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. Option A. Advise the client that the guard cannot assist with the event due to the potential for altercations, without further explanation of legal requirements. Option B. Proceed with intervening in any altercations as requested by the client, assuming that the General Security Guard license covers all necessary actions to maintain order. Option C. Inform the client that direct intervention in altercations beyond basic observation and reporting is not permissible without specific authorization or additional licensing, and advise on the proper procedures for handling such situations within legal boundaries. Option D. Agree to monitor the event but refrain from any intervention, regardless of the severity of any altercations, to avoid any potential legal repercussions. Correct answer is C. Inform the client that direct intervention in altercations beyond basic observation and reporting is not permissible without specific authorization or additional licensing, and advise on the proper procedures for handling such situations within legal boundaries. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a direct conflict between a client's request and the security professional's legal and ethical obligations under the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. CCWExam. The security guard must navigate the client's desire for immediate action with the statutory requirements for proper licensing and authorization. Failure to adhere to these regulations can result in disciplinary action, fines, and damage to the guard's professional reputation and the reputation of their employing agency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately informing the client that the requested action cannot be performed without the appropriate licensing. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. The Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, specifically mandates that individuals performing security guard duties must hold a valid Ontario security guard license. By clearly communicating this requirement, the security guard upholds the law, protects themselves and their employer from liability, and educates the client on proper procedures. This demonstrates a commitment to professional integrity and adherence to the regulatory framework governing security services in Ontario. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with the client's request without verifying licensing. This directly violates the CCWExam, which prohibits individuals from acting as security guards without a license. It exposes the guard and their employer to significant legal penalties and disciplinary action from the Ministry of the Solicitor General. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to perform the requested duties without the proper license, hoping to avoid detection. This is a deliberate act of non-compliance with the CCWExam and constitutes illegal activity. It undermines the integrity of the security profession and the regulatory system designed to ensure public safety and accountability. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request without providing a clear explanation or offering a lawful alternative. While avoiding illegal activity is paramount, a professional security guard should also strive for good client relations. Failing to explain the legal limitations or suggest a compliant course of action can lead to client dissatisfaction and potential reputational damage for the security agency. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a client request that potentially conflicts with regulations, the first step is to identify the relevant legislation. In this case, the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. The next step is to assess whether the request aligns with the requirements of that legislation. If there is a conflict, the professional must clearly communicate the legal limitations to the client. Explain the reasons for these limitations, referencing the relevant legislation if appropriate, and offer lawful alternatives or advise on the necessary steps to achieve the client's objective legally. This approach ensures accountability, protects all parties involved, and upholds the standards of the security profession. Question 3. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in the average response time to security incidents at a large condominium complex in Toronto, Ontario, over the past quarter. As the security manager, what is the most appropriate initial step to address this trend? Option A. Immediately increase the number of security guards on duty during peak hours without a detailed analysis of the current operational efficiency. Option B. Assume the increased response times are due to isolated incidents and do not require a systemic review at this time. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the incident response protocols, including an analysis of staffing schedules, communication systems, and patrol routes, to identify potential bottlenecks and areas for improvement. Option D. Issue a general memo to all security personnel, emphasizing the importance of faster response times and warning of disciplinary action for continued delays. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the incident response protocols, including an analysis of staffing schedules, communication systems, and patrol routes, to identify potential bottlenecks and areas for improvement. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in response times for security incidents at a high-rise residential building in Toronto, Ontario. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the safety and security of residents, potentially violating the core duty of care expected of licensed security professionals under Ontario's Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCSW, and its associated regulations. The delay in response could lead to escalated incidents, property damage, or even harm to individuals, all of which have significant legal and ethical ramifications. Careful judgment is required to identify the root cause and implement effective solutions that align with regulatory expectations. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the incident response protocols, including an analysis of staffing levels, patrol routes, communication systems, and training effectiveness. This proactive and data-driven method directly addresses the performance metrics by seeking to understand the underlying issues contributing to delayed responses. It aligns with the CCSW emphasis on maintaining public safety and ensuring that licensed individuals and agencies operate with due diligence and competence. By systematically evaluating all aspects of the response process, this approach aims to identify systemic weaknesses and implement targeted improvements, thereby enhancing the overall effectiveness of the security service and fulfilling the licensee's obligation. An approach that focuses solely on reprimanding individual guards without investigating the systemic causes is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address potential issues with training, equipment, or operational procedures, which may be the actual drivers of the delays. Such an approach could lead to a decline in morale and may not resolve the core problem, potentially violating the employer's duty to provide adequate resources and training. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the performance metrics as outliers without further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to take seriously the indicators of potential security lapses. It ignores the possibility of recurring issues that could compromise resident safety and contravenes the CCSW requirement for licensees to conduct their business in a manner that upholds public trust and safety. Finally, an approach that involves increasing patrol frequency without understanding the cause of the delays is inefficient and potentially ineffective. While seemingly proactive, it may simply spread existing resources thinner without addressing the root cause, such as communication breakdowns or inadequate training on specific incident types. This could lead to burnout and may not actually improve response times for critical incidents, failing to meet the standard of effective security provision. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data analysis, root cause identification, and evidence-based solutions. This involves 1. Acknowledging and analyzing performance data. 2. Investigating potential contributing factors, e.g., staffing, training, technology, procedures. 3. Consulting relevant regulations and best practices, e.g., CCSW industry standards. 4. Developing and implementing targeted solutions. 5. Monitoring the effectiveness of implemented solutions and making adjustments as needed. Question 4. System analysis indicates a licensed security guard in Toronto, Ontario, is patrolling a commercial property after closing hours. The guard observes an individual who appears to be intoxicated, loitering near the main entrance and speaking loudly on their phone. The individual is not damaging property or directly threatening anyone, but their presence is disruptive. What is the most appropriate course of action for the security guard to take? Option A. Immediately attempt to physically escort the individual off the property to prevent any potential disturbance. Option B. Confront the individual aggressively and threaten to use physical force if they do not leave immediately. Option C. Approach the individual calmly, inform them that the property is closed and request that they leave the premises. If they refuse, contact the police and continue to monitor from a safe distance. Option D. Ignore the individual, assuming they will eventually leave on their own without intervention. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual calmly, inform them that the property is closed, and request that they leave the premises. If they refuse, contact the police and continue to monitor from a safe distance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a security guard's duty to protect property and the potential for escalation of force. The guard must exercise sound judgment to de-escalate the situation while adhering to the legal framework governing the use of force in Ontario, Canada. The presence of a potentially intoxicated individual who is verbally aggressive but not physically threatening requires a nuanced response that prioritizes safety and avoids unnecessary confrontation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a calm, de-escalation-focused approach. This means verbally engaging the individual in a non-confrontational manner, clearly stating the expectation for them to leave the premises, and avoiding any physical contact or aggressive posturing. If the individual refuses to leave, the next step would be to contact the appropriate authorities, e.g., police, and continue to monitor the situation from a safe distance, without further engaging the individual physically. This approach aligns with the principles of the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, which emphasizes the use of minimum necessary force and the importance of de-escalation techniques. The Act requires security guards to act with professionalism and to avoid actions that could be construed as assault or unlawful detention. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately attempting to physically escort the individual off the property. This is problematic because the individual is not posing an immediate physical threat, and such an action could be interpreted as assault under Canadian law, particularly if the individual resists. It escalates the situation unnecessarily and violates the principle of using minimum necessary force. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual's presence and behavior, assuming they will eventually leave on their own. While de-escalation is key, ignoring a potential disturbance or trespass can lead to further issues, including damage to property or a more serious confrontation later. Security guards have a duty of care to protect the premises and its occupants. A third incorrect approach would be to threaten the individual with immediate physical force or to brandish a security tool without a clear and present danger. This is an overreaction and constitutes an inappropriate use of authority, potentially violating the guard's licensing obligations and leading to legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to legal statutes. This involves assessing the immediate threat level, considering the individual's state and behavior, and then choosing the least intrusive response that effectively addresses the situation. When in doubt, contacting law enforcement is always a prudent step. The core principle is to maintain safety for all parties involved, while upholding the guard's responsibilities. Question 5. While on patrol at a shopping mall in Toronto, Ontario, a security guard observes an individual sitting on a bench in a common area, appearing visibly distressed and crying. The individual is not causing a disturbance, but their demeanor suggests they may be experiencing a personal crisis. Which approach would be most appropriate for the security guard to take in this situation? Option A. Ignore the individual and continue with regular patrol duties, assuming they will leave on their own. Option B. Immediately contact the Toronto Police Service to report a suspicious individual exhibiting unusual behavior. Option C. Approach the individual calmly, inquire if they require assistance, and offer to contact mall security management or appropriate support services if needed. Option D. Physically escort the individual off the mall property to prevent any potential disruption. Correct answer is C. Approach the individual calmly, inquire if they require assistance, and offer to contact mall security management or appropriate support services if needed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a security guard's duty to protect property and the potential for escalation of a situation involving a distressed individual. The guard must balance the need for security with the ethical imperative to respond with de-escalation and appropriate assistance, rather than immediate force or exclusion. Careful judgment is required to assess the individual's intent and mental state without making assumptions, and to ensure actions align with the principles of responsible security practice as outlined by the Ontario Ministry of the Solicitor General's Private Security and Investigative Services Act 2005 and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a calm, de-escalation strategy focused on understanding the individual's needs and offering assistance within the scope of the guard's duties. This includes engaging in verbal communication to ascertain the reason for their presence and distress, offering to contact appropriate support services if necessary, and only resorting to removal or reporting if the individual poses a direct threat or refuses to leave after being informed of the property's policies. This aligns with the ethical obligations of a licensed security professional to act with professionalism, integrity, and to prioritize the safety and well-being of all individuals on the premises, while also upholding the security mandate. It reflects a commitment to resolving situations through communication and de-escalation, minimizing the need for more forceful interventions. An approach that immediately involves law enforcement without attempting any form of communication or de-escalation is incorrect, because it bypasses the guard's primary responsibility to assess and manage the situation first. While involving police is an option, it should not be the initial response to a distressed individual who has not yet demonstrated any overt threat or violation. This premature escalation can unnecessarily involve law enforcement resources and may be perceived as an overly aggressive or insensitive response, potentially violating the spirit of professional conduct. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual and continue with routine patrols, assuming they will eventually leave. This fails to address a potential security concern or a person in need of assistance. It demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement and could lead to the situation worsening or the individual remaining on the property and potentially causing issues later. Professional security practice demands an awareness of and response to individuals on the premises, especially those exhibiting signs of distress. Finally, an approach that involves physically escorting the individual off the property immediately, without attempting verbal engagement or assessing the situation, is also incorrect. This could be seen as an excessive use of force or an unwarranted physical intervention, especially if the individual is not posing an immediate threat. Such actions could lead to accusations of assault or unprofessional conduct and fail to consider the individual's potential vulnerability or the possibility of a simple misunderstanding. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, communication, and de-escalation. This involves assessing the situation for immediate threats, engaging verbally to understand the individual's needs and intentions, offering assistance within the guard's purview, and only then considering more assertive actions like reporting to management, contacting authorities, or escorting off the property if de-escalation fails and a security risk is confirmed. Question 6. Investigation of a security guard observing two individuals in a restricted area of a commercial property in Ontario, Canada, who appear to be engaged in a hushed conversation and examining what looks like a blueprint. The guard has no immediate indication of criminal activity, but feels the situation warrants attention. What is the most appropriate course of action for the security guard? Option A. Approach the individuals directly. Identify yourself as a security guard and demand to know their purpose for being in the restricted area and what they are discussing. Option B. Discreetly document the individual's presence, their actions, and the approximate time, and report this information through the established internal reporting procedure to a supervisor. Option C. Immediately contact the local police department to report suspicious activity and request their presence at the location. Option D. Continue patrolling the area and ignore the individuals, assuming they have a legitimate reason to be there and are not posing a threat. The correct answer is B. Discreetly document the individual's presence, their actions, and the approximate time, and report this information through the established internal reporting procedure to a supervisor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for a breach of privacy and the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. A security guard's duty is to protect property and individuals, which includes maintaining confidentiality of information encountered during their duties. The guard must balance the need to report a potential issue with the obligation to respect privacy and adhere to established protocols. This requires careful judgment to avoid overstepping boundaries or creating unnecessary alarm. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves discreetly documenting the observed activity and reporting it through the established internal channels to a supervisor or designated authority. This approach is correct because it acknowledges the potential concern without making assumptions or taking immediate, unauthorized action. It respects the privacy of the individuals involved by not directly confronting them or disseminating information unnecessarily. Furthermore, it adheres to professional security protocols, which typically mandate reporting observations to superiors for appropriate investigation and action. This ensures that any necessary follow-up is handled by individuals with the authority and training to do so, minimizing the risk of legal or ethical violations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Directly confronting the individuals and demanding to know their purpose is an incorrect approach. This action could be perceived as harassment, an overreach of authority, and a violation of privacy rights. Security guards are generally not empowered to detain or interrogate individuals without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity or a direct threat. Furthermore, making assumptions about their intentions and acting on those assumptions can lead to false accusations and reputational damage. Ignoring the activity entirely is also an incorrect approach. While it avoids direct confrontation, it fails to uphold the security guard's responsibility to observe and report potential security concerns. If the activity, though seemingly innocuous, was part of a larger illicit operation, the guard's inaction could have serious consequences. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to fulfill a core duty. Contacting law enforcement directly without prior authorization or a clear, immediate threat is another incorrect approach. While law enforcement intervention is sometimes necessary, security guards typically operate under specific directives regarding when and how to involve external agencies. Unauthorized contact can lead to confusion, misallocation of resources, and potential legal repercussions for the guard and their employer. It bypasses the established chain of command and the organization's own procedures for handling security matters. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, documentation, and adherence to established protocols. When encountering a situation that raises concern but does not present an immediate, overt threat, the professional should first observe and gather details without interfering. Next, they should consult their training and organizational policies to determine the appropriate course of action. This typically involves reporting the observation to a supervisor or designated point of contact, allowing for a coordinated and authorized response. This systematic approach ensures that actions are lawful, ethical, and effective, protecting both the individuals involved and the integrity of the security operation. Question 7. Assessment of a security guard's response to a patron exhibiting disruptive behavior in a licensed establishment in Toronto, Ontario. A security guard observes a patron speaking loudly and erratically, gesturing aggressively, and bumping into furniture, but not directly threatening anyone or causing damage. The guard is aware that the patron may have consumed alcohol. What is the most appropriate course of action for the security guard to take? Adhering to the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. Option A. Immediately attempt to physically escort the patron out of the establishment to prevent further disruption. Option B. Continue with routine patrols and ignore the patron's behavior, assuming it will resolve itself. Option C. Immediately contact the Toronto Police Service to remove the patron from the premises. Option D. Verbally attempt to de-escalate the situation by speaking calmly to the patron. Assess the ongoing threat level, and if the disturbance persists without immediate danger, discreetly observe and report to management or relevant authorities if escalation occurs. The correct answer is D. Verbally attempt to de-escalate the situation by speaking calmly to the patron. Assess the ongoing threat level, and if the disturbance persists without immediate danger, discreetly observe and report to management or relevant authorities if escalation occurs. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a security guard's duty to protect property and the potential for escalation of force. The guard must exercise sound judgment to de-escalate a situation while adhering to legal and ethical boundaries, particularly concerning the use of force and the reporting of incidents. The presence of a potentially intoxicated individual who is causing a disturbance but not directly threatening harm requires a nuanced response that prioritizes safety and compliance with the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediate de-escalation and observation without resorting to physical intervention, unless absolutely necessary and legally justified. This approach prioritizes the safety of all individuals involved and minimizes the risk of unnecessary force. The guard should verbally attempt to calm the individual, assess the level of threat, and if the disturbance continues without posing an immediate danger, discreetly observe and report the situation to the appropriate authorities, e.g., building management or police, if the disturbance escalates to a level requiring their intervention. This aligns with the principles of responsible security practice and the requirement to act with professionalism and restraint as outlined in the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, which emphasizes the need for guards to act in a manner that does not endanger the public. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately attempting to physically remove the individual from the premises. This is problematic because it constitutes an unnecessary use of force when the individual is merely causing a disturbance and not posing an immediate physical threat. Such action could lead to assault charges and violate the guard's duty to use only the force necessary to prevent harm or loss, as stipulated by the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the disturbance and continue with routine patrols. This is a failure of duty. Security guards have a responsibility to address and report disturbances that impact the safety and security of the premises and its occupants. Ignoring the situation could lead to further escalation or damage and demonstrates a lack of diligence, which is contrary to the professional standards expected under the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005. A third incorrect approach is to immediately call the police without attempting any form of de-escalation or assessment. While involving law enforcement is sometimes necessary, doing so as the first and only step without any attempt to manage the situation can be an overreaction. It may escalate the situation unnecessarily and could be seen as an inefficient use of police resources if the disturbance is minor and manageable by the security guard. The guard's role includes initial assessment and de-escalation before escalating to external authorities, as per general security protocols and the spirit of responsible incident management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to incident management. First, assess the situation to understand the nature and severity of the disturbance. Second, attempt de-escalation through verbal communication and a calm demeanor. Third, if de-escalation fails and the situation poses a risk, observe and report to appropriate parties or authorities. Fourth, only resort to physical intervention or the use of force as a last resort, strictly within legal parameters, and when there is an immediate threat of harm or loss. Documentation and reporting are crucial at every stage. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that armed security personnel in Ontario often face dynamic situations requiring immediate judgment calls. An armed security guard is patrolling a commercial property in Toronto late at night and observes two individuals attempting to pry open a locked service door. The individuals appear agitated and are carrying what look like crowbars. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the armed guard? Option A. Immediately draw their firearm and issue a loud verbal command for the individuals to stop and drop their tools. Option B. Verbally challenge the individuals in an aggressive manner and immediately contact the police without further assessment or de-escalation attempt. Option C. Verbally challenge the individuals, assess their response and the immediate threat level, and prepare to draw their firearm only if a direct threat to safety or property is imminent and unavoidable through other means, followed by prompt reporting. Option D. Continue their patrol route, assuming the individuals are employees or authorized personnel, and do not intervene. Correct answer is C. Verbally challenge the individuals, assess their response and the immediate threat level, and prepare to draw their firearm only if a direct threat to safety or property is imminent and unavoidable through other means, followed by prompt reporting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, balancing the immediate need to de-escalate a situation with the strict legal requirements for the use of force and the reporting of incidents. The guard must act decisively to protect life and property while adhering to the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCSW, and its associated regulation, specifically concerning the use of force and the duty to report. The pressure of an unfolding event, potential for escalation, and the need for accurate documentation create a complex decision-making environment. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the armed guard prioritizing immediate safety by verbally challenging the individuals and assessing the threat level without immediately resorting to drawing their firearm. This aligns with the CCSW emphasis on de-escalation and the lawful use of force, which generally requires a demonstrable threat of serious harm or death before lethal force can be considered. Drawing a firearm should be a last resort, reserved for situations where verbal commands are ineffective and the threat is imminent and severe. The guard should then, as soon as it is safe and practical, report the incident to their supervisor and the appropriate authorities, documenting all actions taken and observations made. This adheres to the reporting obligations under CCSW and ensures transparency and accountability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately draw their firearm upon observing the individuals. This action, while potentially intimidating, can escalate the situation unnecessarily and may not be justifiable under CCSW if the individuals have not yet demonstrated a clear and present danger requiring such a response. It bypasses de-escalation opportunities and could lead to an unwarranted use of force, violating the principles of proportionality and necessity. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individuals and continue their patrol without any intervention. This fails to uphold the duty of care expected of a licensed security guard, particularly an armed one, to protect property and prevent criminal activity. It also neglects the potential for the situation to escalate into a more serious incident, leaving the guard and the public vulnerable. A further incorrect approach is to verbally challenge the individuals aggressively and then immediately call the police without further assessment or attempting de-escalation. While calling the police is often necessary, an overly aggressive verbal challenge without assessing the immediate threat could provoke a negative reaction. The guard's role includes a duty to assess and attempt to manage the situation within their training and legal authority before solely relying on external intervention, provided it is safe to do so. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a tiered response strategy. First, assess the situation from a safe distance. Second, attempt verbal de-escalation and clear communication. Third, if de-escalation fails and a threat emerges, consider drawing a firearm only if the threat level warrants it according to legal guidelines. Fourth, if force is used or the situation remains volatile, secure the scene and report immediately. Throughout this process, maintaining situational awareness and adhering to legal and ethical obligations is paramount. Question 9. Market research demonstrates that security personnel are often faced with situations where individuals may attempt to access restricted areas. In Ontario, Canada, a licensed armed security guard is patrolling the perimeter of a high-security research facility. The guard observes an individual who is not wearing any visible identification or uniform associated with the facility, attempting to open a door to a clearly marked restricted laboratory. The guard has received no prior intelligence about visitors or scheduled access for this area. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the security guard? Option A. Ignore the individual and continue the patrol, assuming they have a legitimate reason to be there. Option B. Immediately attempt to physically detain the individual and escort them away from the restricted area. Option C. Confront the individual aggressively, demanding to know why they are attempting to access the restricted area and ordering them to leave immediately. Option D. Approach the individual calmly, identify yourself as a licensed security professional, and politely inquire about their purpose for being in the restricted area, seeking to verify their authorization. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual calmly, identify yourself as a licensed security professional, and politely inquire about their purpose for being in the restricted area, seeking to verify their authorization. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, Canada, involving the potential for unauthorized access to a restricted area. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to maintain security and prevent unauthorized entry with the requirement to act within the strict legal boundaries of the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCSA, and its associated regulations. Misinterpreting the scope of authority or acting outside of established protocols can lead to legal repercussions, disciplinary action, and a breach of public trust. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation, identify the individual's intent, and respond appropriately without overstepping legal authority. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a de-escalation and verification approach. This means approaching the individual calmly, identifying oneself as a licensed security professional, and politely inquiring about their purpose for being in the restricted area. The guard should then attempt to verify their authorization through official means, such as checking an access list, contacting a supervisor, or requesting identification that matches an authorized personnel roster. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principles of lawful authority and reasonable action as outlined in the CCSA. Section 10 of the CCSA grants security guards the authority to detain individuals who are found committing an offense or are reasonably suspected of having committed an offense, but this authority must be exercised judiciously and with due regard for the individual's rights. The primary goal is to secure the premises and prevent unauthorized access, not to engage in aggressive confrontation unless absolutely necessary and legally justified. This method prioritizes de-escalation and information gathering, minimizing the risk of unnecessary force or false imprisonment. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach involving immediate physical restraint or forceful removal without attempting to ascertain the individual's purpose or authorization is professionally unacceptable. This action could constitute unlawful detention or assault under Canadian law, exceeding the authority granted to a private security guard under the CCSA. The guard has no inherent right to physically detain someone simply for being in a restricted area unless there is a clear indication of criminal intent or a breach of the property owner's rules that warrants such action, and even then, the detention must be reasonable and proportionate. Another unacceptable approach would be to ignore the individual and allow them to proceed into the restricted area. This directly contravenes the guard's duty to protect the property and maintain security as stipulated by their license and employment contract. It demonstrates a failure to uphold professional responsibilities and could lead to a breach of security, potential loss or damage to property, and disciplinary action from their employer and the licensing body. Finally, confronting the individual aggressively and demanding they leave without attempting to understand their situation or verify their authorization is also professionally unsound. While the area is restricted, a confrontational stance can escalate the situation unnecessarily and may lead to a complaint of harassment or intimidation. The CCSA emphasizes professionalism and ethical conduct, which includes approaching situations with a calm and measured demeanor. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, assessment, communication, and lawful action. First, observe the individual's behavior and context. Second, assess the potential risk and the specific nature of the restricted area. Third, communicate clearly and professionally to understand the individual's intent. Fourth, take lawful action based on the gathered information, always within the bounds of the CCSA and company policy, and with a focus on de-escalation and the prevention of harm or loss. Question 10. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a private security firm operating in Ontario, Canada, has identified 3 primary threats to a client's retail establishment: shoplifting, vandalism, and a potential armed robbery. The estimated annual probability of shoplifting is 80%, with an average financial loss of $5,000 per incident. The estimated annual probability of vandalism is 20%, with an average financial loss of $15,000 per incident. The estimated annual probability of an armed robbery is 5%, with an average financial loss of $50,000 per incident. Based on these figures, what is the total quantifiable expected annual financial loss from these identified threats? Option A, $25,000. Option B, $70,000. Option C, $23,000. Option D, $30,000. The correct answer is C, $23,000. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in security operations, quantifying and mitigating risks associated with potential threats. The professional challenge lies in translating abstract threat probabilities and potential impact into actionable financial figures that inform resource allocation and security strategy. This requires not only an understanding of security principles, but also a grasp of financial mathematics and risk management frameworks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the assessment is both realistic and defensible, avoiding both overspending on improbable threats and under-resourcing critical vulnerabilities. The best approach involves a systematic calculation of the potential financial loss for each identified threat. This begins by estimating the probability of each threat occurring and the potential financial impact if it does. The expected financial loss for a specific threat is then calculated by multiplying these two figures. Expected loss equals probability of threat X financial impact. Summing these expected losses across all identified threats provides a total quantifiable risk exposure. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of quantitative risk assessment, a cornerstone of effective security management. It allows for objective prioritization of security investments by focusing resources on threats with the highest expected financial impact, thereby maximizing the return on security expenditure. This aligns with the ethical obligation to manage resources responsibly and effectively, ensuring the best possible protection within budgetary constraints. An incorrect approach would be to simply sum the potential financial impacts of all identified threats without considering their probability. This would lead to an inflated and unrealistic assessment of risk, potentially resulting in overallocation of resources to low probability, high-impact events while neglecting more probable, albeit lower-impact, threats. This fails to adhere to the fundamental principles of risk assessment, which mandate the consideration of both likelihood and consequence. Another incorrect approach would be to use a qualitative risk matrix, e.g., low, medium, high, and assign arbitrary financial values to these categories without a clear calculation. While qualitative assessments have their place, this method lacks the precision required for informed financial decision-making and can be subjective, leading to inconsistent and potentially flawed resource allocation. It bypasses the necessary quantitative analysis to justify expenditure. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the most catastrophic potential event, regardless of its probability, and allocate the entire security budget to mitigate that single risk. This ignores the principle of diversification of risk and fails to address other significant threats that, while individually less severe, collectively pose a substantial risk. It represents a failure to conduct a comprehensive risk assessment. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with comprehensive threat identification and vulnerability analysis. This should be followed by quantitative estimation of probability and impact, leading to the calculation of expected financial loss for each threat. Security investments should then be prioritized based on these calculated figures, ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently and effectively to mitigate the most significant risks. Regular review and updating of the risk assessment are also crucial to adapt to changing threat landscapes and operational environments. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a private security firm in Ontario, Canada, needs to refine its approach to identifying and mitigating potential security threats to its clients' premises. Considering the regulatory landscape governed by Ontario's Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, which of the following risk assessment methodologies would best ensure effective and compliant security operations? Option A. A methodology that uses anecdotal evidence and assumptions from security personnel about potential threats without formal data collection or structured analysis. Option B. A comprehensive methodology that analyzes potential threats, assesses vulnerabilities, evaluates the likelihood and impact of incidents, and develops proportionate mitigation strategies based on current operational context and legal requirements. Option C. A methodology that primarily relies on historical incident reports from past engagements, assuming that future threats will mirror past occurrences. Option D. A methodology that prioritizes the implementation of the most technologically advanced and visible security measures, regardless of a detailed analysis of specific risks. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive methodology that analyzes potential threats, assesses vulnerabilities, evaluates the likelihood and impact of incidents, and develops proportionate mitigation strategies based on current operational context and legal requirements. Explanation: governance review demonstrates a need to enhance the risk assessment protocols for a private security firm operating in Ontario, Canada. The scenario presents a challenge because it requires balancing proactive threat identification with resource allocation and the potential for overvigilance, which can lead to unnecessary costs or an overly intrusive security presence. Professional judgment is crucial to ensure that risk assessments are comprehensive, proportionate, and legally compliant under Ontario's Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCSA, and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a systematic, multifaceted risk assessment that considers both the likelihood and impact of potential threats, while also factoring in the specific operational context and legal obligations. This includes identifying potential vulnerabilities, analyzing the nature and severity of possible threats, e.g., theft, vandalism, unauthorized access, workplace violence, and evaluating the effectiveness of existing security measures. The outcome should be a prioritized list of risks and recommended mitigation strategies that are practical, cost-effective, and aligned with the CCSA requirements for licensed security personnel to act in a lawful and ethical manner. This approach ensures that security resources are deployed strategically to address the most significant risks, thereby maximizing effectiveness and compliance. An approach that focuses solely on historical incident data, without considering emerging threats or changes in the operational environment, is flawed. While historical data is valuable, it may not adequately predict future risks, leading to a reactive rather than proactive security posture. This could result in a failure to address new vulnerabilities and a potential breach of the duty of care expected of licensed security providers under Ontario law. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize high-visibility security measures without a thorough analysis of their actual risk reduction effectiveness. This can lead to inefficient use of resources and may not address the root causes of security vulnerabilities. Furthermore, an overly aggressive or intrusive security presence, not justified by a proper risk assessment, could lead to complaints, legal challenges, and a negative public perception, potentially violating principles of proportionality and respect for individual rights, which are implicitly expected of licensed security professionals in Ontario. Finally, an approach that relies heavily on assumptions or anecdotal evidence without rigorous data collection and analysis is professionally unsound. This can lead to inaccurate risk profiles and the implementation of inappropriate or ineffective security measures. Licensed security professionals in Ontario are expected to conduct their business with a degree of diligence and competence, which necessitates evidence-based decision-making. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This typically involves 1. Threat identification. What could go wrong? 2. Vulnerability assessment. How could it happen? 3. Impact analysis. What would be the consequences? 4. Likelihood assessment. How probable is it? 5. Risk evaluation. Prioritizing risks based on likelihood and impact. 6. Risk treatment. Developing and implementing mitigation strategies. 7. Monitoring and review. Continuously evaluating the effectiveness of controls and updating the assessment. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with legal and ethical standards. Question 12. The audit findings indicate that a licensed establishment in Ontario, Canada, has experienced a recent increase in minor altercations and property damage. What is the most effective approach for the security management team to address these emerging issues and prevent future occurrences? Option A. Implement a new surveillance system and hope that its presence deters future undesirable behavior. Option B. Increase the number of security personnel on duty during peak hours without a formal assessment of the root causes of the incidents. Option C. Conduct a thorough, documented risk assessment specific to the premises, identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, and develop a comprehensive mitigation plan based on these findings. Option D. Focus solely on responding to and de-escalating incidents as they happen, without undertaking a proactive assessment of underlying risks. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough, documented risk assessment specific to the premises, identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, and develop a comprehensive mitigation plan based on these findings. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential lapse in the proactive identification and mitigation of security risks at a licensed premises in Ontario, Canada. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the security professional to move beyond reactive responses to incidents and demonstrate a systematic approach to anticipating and preventing future threats. The onus is on the licensee and their security personnel to ensure a safe environment, which necessitates a forward-looking risk assessment process. The best approach involves conducting a comprehensive, documented risk assessment that considers all potential threats and vulnerabilities specific to the licensed premises in Ontario. This includes reviewing past incident reports, analyzing the physical environment, considering the nature of the business, e.g., late-night establishment, high-traffic area, and consulting with local law enforcement and relevant stakeholders. The outcome of this assessment should be a clear, actionable plan to mitigate identified risks, which may include enhanced staffing, improved surveillance, revised operational procedures, or specialized training. This aligns with the general duty of care expected of licensed establishments under Ontario's liquor and security licensing regulations, which implicitly require licensees to take reasonable steps to prevent harm and maintain order. The Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, Ontario, also mandates that security professionals operate with due diligence and professionalism, which includes understanding and addressing potential risks. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on reactive measures, such as responding to incidents only after they occur. This fails to meet the proactive standard required for effective risk management and could be seen as a dereliction of duty, potentially leading to repeated incidents and increased liability for the licensee. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial or undocumented assessment. Without a formal, documented process, it is difficult to demonstrate due diligence or to effectively track the implementation and effectiveness of mitigation strategies. This lack of rigor can leave the premises vulnerable to unforeseen risks and makes it challenging to justify security expenditures or operational changes to regulatory bodies. Finally, an approach that focuses only on the most obvious or frequent risks, while ignoring less common but potentially severe threats, is also flawed. A comprehensive risk assessment must consider a broad spectrum of possibilities to ensure all significant vulnerabilities are addressed. Professionals should employ a structured risk management framework. This typically involves 1. Hazard identification. What could go wrong? 2. Risk analysis. How likely is it to happen and what would be the impact? 3. Risk evaluation. Prioritizing risks based on their severity. 4. Risk treatment. Developing and implementing strategies to mitigate or eliminate risks. 5. Monitoring and review, regularly assessing the effectiveness of the strategies and updating the assessment as circumstances change. This systematic process ensures that security measures are proportionate to the identified risks and are continuously improved. Question 13. Compliance review shows that an armed security guard in Ontario, Canada, responded to a loud disturbance involving a patron who appeared to be intoxicated and aggressive. The guard successfully de-escalated the situation without physical intervention, and the patron left the premises. The guard then completed their shift without filing a written report on the incident. What is the most appropriate course of action for the guard regarding the incident? Option A. Delay writing the incident report until the next scheduled shift to allow for more time to recall details. Option B. Immediately prepare a detailed written incident report documenting all observations, actions taken, and the outcome of the de-escalation. Option C. Verbally inform their supervisor about the incident at the end of the shift and consider it sufficiently handled. Option D. File a written report at the end of the shift, omitting any mention of the patron's apparent intoxication or aggression to avoid potential complications. The correct answer is B. Immediately prepare a detailed written incident report documenting all observations, actions taken, and the outcome of the de-escalation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, Canada, where the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCWA, and its associated regulations govern their conduct. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to respond to a potential threat with the strict requirements for documentation and reporting, ensuring that actions taken are both effective and legally defensible. Failure to adhere to proper procedures can lead to disciplinary action, loss of license, and potential legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately assessing the situation to ensure the safety of all individuals present, including oneself, and then proceeding with a clear, concise, and accurate written report as soon as practically possible. This approach prioritizes immediate safety while ensuring that all necessary information is captured for review and potential investigation. Aligning with the CCSA emphasis on responsible and accountable security operations, the CCSA mandates that licensees maintain records of incidents and their actions, and prompt, accurate reporting is crucial for fulfilling this obligation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to delay reporting until the end of the shift. This failure to report promptly can lead to memory degradation, making the report less accurate and potentially omitting critical details. This contravenes the spirit and likely the letter of the CCSA record-keeping requirements, which implicitly demand timely documentation. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on verbal reporting to a supervisor without any written documentation. While verbal communication is important, it is insufficient under the CCSA for official incident reporting. Written records are essential for accountability, evidence, and future reference, and a verbal-only report lacks the permanence and detail required. A third incorrect approach is to omit any mention of the potential threat in the report, focusing only on the routine aspects of the shift. This constitutes a deliberate misrepresentation of events and a failure to report a significant incident, which is a direct violation of the CCSA requirements for honesty and integrity, and could have serious consequences if the incident later requires investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate safety, followed by prompt and accurate documentation. This involves understanding the legal and ethical obligations under the CCSA, including the requirement for thorough incident reporting. When faced with a potential threat, the immediate priority is de-escalation and ensuring safety. Once the immediate situation is stabilized, the next critical step is to document all observations, actions, and communications as thoroughly and accurately as possible, adhering to established reporting protocols. This systematic approach ensures both operational effectiveness and regulatory compliance. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate a report of two individuals loitering suspiciously near a restricted area of a commercial property in Toronto, Ontario. The report is vague, providing no specific details about the individual's actions or intentions, only their presence. As a licensed armed security guard, what is the most appropriate initial course of action? Option A. Dismiss the report as unsubstantiated due to its vagueness and continue with routine patrols. Option B. Immediately approach the individuals and demand identification, informing them they are under suspicion. Option C. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior from a safe distance to gather more information and assess the credibility of the report, then report findings to a supervisor for further direction. Option D. Contact the Toronto Police Service to report the individuals as suspicious and request their immediate attendance. The correct answer is C. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior from a safe distance to gather more information and assess the credibility of the report, then report findings to a supervisor for further direction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, Canada, balancing the need for proactive security measures with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid unnecessary escalation or infringement on individual rights. The armed guard must interpret a vague report and decide on a course of action that is both effective in mitigating potential threats and compliant with the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCSA, and its associated regulations. The challenge lies in the subjective nature of the information received and the potential for misinterpretation, which could lead to an overreaction or an underreaction, both with significant consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a layered response that prioritizes information gathering and de-escalation, while maintaining a readiness to act if a credible threat emerges. This aligns with the CCSA emphasis on acting lawfully and ethically, and the general principles of responsible security practice. Specifically, this approach involves discreet observation to verify the report's credibility without alarming potential subjects, followed by communication with the security supervisor to assess the situation further and determine if law enforcement intervention is warranted. This method respects individual privacy, avoids premature confrontation, and ensures that any subsequent action is based on verified information and appropriate authorization, thereby adhering to the principles of proportionality and necessity mandated by the CCSA. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a direct confrontation with the individuals based solely on a vague report is a failure to conduct a proper risk assessment and violates the principle of acting lawfully and with due regard for the rights of individuals. The CISA requires security guards to act in a manner that is not arbitrary or discriminatory. This approach risks false accusation, potential civil liability, and an unnecessary escalation of a situation that may be entirely benign. Immediately contacting law enforcement without any attempt at verification or further assessment is also an overreaction and an inefficient use of police resources. While safety is paramount, the CISA encourages a graduated response. This approach bypasses the guard's responsibility to gather information and make an initial assessment, potentially leading to unnecessary police involvement and a strain on public services. Ignoring the report entirely due to its vagueness is a dereliction of duty. The CISA mandates that licensed security guards take reasonable steps to protect persons and property. Even a vague report warrants some level of attention and assessment to ensure potential risks are not overlooked, which could lead to liability for negligence if an incident were to occur. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Ontario should employ a decision-making framework that begins with information assessment, followed by risk evaluation, and then a graduated response. This framework emphasizes observation, verification, consultation with supervisors, and, if necessary, escalation to appropriate authorities. The goal is always to achieve security objectives with the least intrusive means necessary, while remaining compliant with all relevant legislation, including the CISA. Question 15. What factors should a licensed security professional in Ontario prioritize when conducting a risk assessment for a new client's retail establishment to ensure effective and compliant security measures? Option A. Prioritizing the most aggressive response tactics to immediately neutralize any perceived threat. Option B. Relying on general security protocols previously used for similar retail establishments without a site-specific evaluation. Option C. The immediate implementation of highly visible security personnel and advanced surveillance technology to maximize deterrence. Option D. A comprehensive analysis of potential threats, vulnerabilities, the likelihood of incidents, and the potential impact of security breaches, considering the specific retail environment and customer flow. The correct answer is D. A comprehensive analysis of potential threats, vulnerabilities, the likelihood of incidents, and the potential impact of security breaches, considering the specific retail environment and customer flow. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security professional to balance the immediate need for security with the potential for unintended consequences and the legal framework governing their actions in Ontario. A thorough risk assessment is paramount to ensure that security measures are proportionate, effective, and compliant with Ontario's Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CISA, and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a systematic evaluation of potential threats, vulnerabilities, and the likelihood and impact of security incidents. This includes considering the specific environment, the nature of the assets or individuals being protected, and the potential for escalation. Identifying and analyzing these factors, a security professional can develop a layered security strategy that is both effective and legally defensible. This aligns with the CISA emphasis on responsible and professional conduct, requiring licensees to act with integrity and to ensure their actions are necessary and proportionate to the risks identified. The process encourages proactive identification of risks and the implementation of appropriate mitigation strategies, thereby preventing incidents and minimizing harm. An approach that focuses solely on visible deterrence without a comprehensive threat analysis is flawed. While visible security presence can be a deterrent, it may not address underlying vulnerabilities or more sophisticated threats. This could lead to a misallocation of resources and a false sense of security, potentially violating the CISA requirement for licensees to perform their duties competently and diligently. Another incorrect approach is to implement security measures based on assumptions or past experiences without a current, site-specific risk assessment. This can result in overly restrictive or inadequate security protocols. The CISA mandates that security services be provided in a manner that is reasonable and necessary, which implies a need for current and relevant risk analysis. Relying on outdated information or generalizations fails to meet this standard. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes immediate, forceful intervention without considering de-escalation or alternative responses is problematic. The CISA expects licensees to exercise sound judgment and to use force only when necessary and in accordance with legal guidelines. A risk assessment should include strategies for de-escalation and the appropriate use of force, ensuring that actions are proportionate to the threat. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the operational environment and potential threats. This involves gathering intelligence, analyzing vulnerabilities, and assessing the likelihood and impact of various scenarios. Based on this assessment, a security plan should be developed that outlines specific measures, including physical security, personnel deployment, and emergency procedures. This plan should be regularly reviewed and updated to reflect changing circumstances and emerging risks, ensuring ongoing compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical obligations. Question 16. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a group of individuals are loitering in a dimly lit area of a shopping mall in Toronto, Ontario, exhibiting nervous behavior and frequently looking at their phones. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for a licensed armed security guard under the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005? Option A. Focus on the individual's attire and general demeanor, as these factors often correlate with potential security risks. Option B. Initiate a loud verbal warning to the group, instructing them to leave the area due to their perceived suspicious activity. Option C. Immediately approach the individuals and demand identification, stating that their presence is suspicious. Option D. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior and interactions, noting any specific actions that suggest an imminent threat to persons or property, before considering any form of intervention. The correct answer is D. Discreetly observe the individual's behavior and interactions, noting any specific actions that suggest an imminent threat to persons or property, before considering any form of intervention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, Canada, balancing the need for proactive security measures with the legal and ethical boundaries of their authority. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCWExam, and its associated regulations, particularly concerning the use of force and the definition of a threat. A guard must assess a situation not just on immediate perception, but also on established legal thresholds, avoiding overreach that could lead to civil liability or criminal charges, while still fulfilling their duty of care. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic, evidence-based assessment that aligns with the CCWExam requirements for lawful intervention. This means observing the individual's behavior, looking for overt actions that constitute a clear and present danger, and considering the context of the environment. The guard must be able to articulate specific, observable behaviors that indicate an imminent threat of harm to persons or property, rather than relying on assumptions or vague feelings of unease. This aligns with the CCWExam emphasis on reasonable grounds for apprehension and the lawful use of force only when necessary and proportionate to the threat. The guard's primary duty is to protect, but this protection must be exercised within the strict confines of the law, prioritizing de-escalation and observation until a clear legal justification for intervention arises. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately confront individuals based on a subjective feeling of suspicion or because they appear out of place. This fails to meet the CCWExam standard of requiring reasonable grounds to believe a crime is being committed or is about to be committed, or that there is an imminent threat. Such an action could be construed as harassment or an unlawful detention, exposing the guard and their employer to legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the individual's appearance or perceived background, rather than their actions. CCWExam does not permit profiling or discrimination. Security personnel must base their assessments on observable behavior and credible intelligence, not on stereotypes or assumptions about who might pose a risk. This approach is ethically unsound and legally indefensible. A third incorrect approach is to escalate the situation by making loud demands or displaying a weapon prematurely, without first attempting to observe and assess the situation further. While armed guards are authorized to carry firearms, their use, or even the overt display of one, is a significant escalation that should only occur when there is an immediate and unavoidable threat that cannot be mitigated by other means. This premature escalation can itself create a dangerous situation, and is not in line with the CCWExam principles of proportionality and necessity. Professional reasoning. security professionals in Ontario must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes observation, assessment, and adherence to legal thresholds. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously observing the environment and individuals within it. 2. Behavioral analysis, focusing on specific, observable actions that indicate intent or threat rather than subjective feelings. 3. Legal thresholds, understanding and applying the CCW definitions of threat and grounds for intervention. 4. Proportionality, ensuring any action taken is proportionate to the identified threat. 5. Documentation, recording all observations and actions taken for accountability. This systematic approach ensures that interventions are lawful, ethical, and effective in maintaining safety and security. Question 17. Process analysis reveals a security guard in Toronto, Ontario, observes an individual loitering near a restricted area of a commercial property. The individual appears nervous and is looking around frequently, but has not yet attempted to enter the restricted zone or engaged in any overt criminal act. What is the most appropriate course of action for the armed guard to take, adhering to Ontario's regulatory framework for private security professionals? Option A. Immediately approach the individual, demand identification, and detain them based on their nervous demeanor and proximity to a restricted area. Option B. Display their firearm to deter the individual from approaching the restricted area further. Option C. Conduct a discreet observation to gather more information about the individual's behavior and intent, assessing for reasonable and probable grounds to believe an offense under the Trespass to Property Act is occurring or about to occur before considering any intervention. Option D. Ignore the individual as they have not yet committed a clear offense to avoid potential confrontation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a discreet observation to gather more information about the individual's behavior and intent, assessing for reasonable and probable grounds to believe an offense under the Trespass to Property Act is occurring or about to occur before considering any intervention. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, Canada, balancing the need for proactive security measures with the legal and ethical boundaries of their authority. The core difficulty lies in interpreting the scope of reasonable and probable grounds for detention under Ontario's Trespass to Property Act and the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCW. An armed guard must act decisively to prevent harm or loss, but must also avoid unlawful detention or excessive force, which can lead to civil liability and disciplinary action from the Ontario Ministry of the Solicitor General. The presence of a weapon adds a layer of complexity, demanding heightened awareness of de-escalation techniques and the legal justification for its use or display. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a thorough, on-site risk assessment that prioritizes observation and information gathering before any direct intervention. This means observing the individual's behavior, looking for overt signs of criminal intent or immediate danger, e.g., carrying stolen property, attempting to breach a secure area, displaying aggressive intent, and assessing the potential for harm to persons or property. If reasonable and probable grounds exist to believe the individual is trespassing and has committed or is about to commit an offense under the Trespass to Property Act, the guard may detain them for the purpose of removing them from the property or calling the police. This approach aligns with the CCW requirement for guards to act lawfully and ethically, and the Trespass to Property Act's provisions regarding lawful detention. It emphasizes evidence-based decision-making, minimizing the risk of wrongful detention or escalation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately confront and detain the individual based solely on suspicion or a perceived shady appearance. This lacks the necessary reasonable and probable grounds required by law and can be construed as harassment or unlawful detention, violating both the CCW and the Trespass to Property Act. It fails to gather sufficient evidence to justify the intervention. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, even if there are clear indicators of potential criminal activity or a threat. While avoiding confrontation is important, a security professional has a duty of care to protect the property and persons they are assigned to safeguard. Failing to act when reasonable grounds exist to believe an offense is occurring or about to occur could be seen as dereliction of duty under the CCW and may expose the guard and their employer to liability. A third incorrect approach is to escalate the situation by immediately displaying a weapon without a clear and present threat or a lawful justification for its use. While armed guards are permitted to carry firearms under specific licensing and training requirements in Ontario, their display or use is strictly governed by the Criminal Code of Canada and the CCWExam. Displaying a weapon without immediate necessity can be seen as an excessive use of force, potentially leading to criminal charges and severe disciplinary action, and it undermines the principle of de-escalation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered decision-making framework. First, observe and assess the situation for objective indicators of risk or unlawful activity. Second, consult relevant legislation, Trespass to Property Act, CCWExam, to understand the scope of their authority and limitations. Third, if grounds for intervention exist, consider the least intrusive method necessary to achieve the security objective, prioritizing de-escalation and communication. Fourth, document all observations and actions meticulously. If in doubt, err on the side of caution and consult with supervisors or law enforcement. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential security concern involving an individual exhibiting erratic behavior near a restricted area at commercial property in Toronto, Ontario. As a licensed armed security professional, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Observe the individual's behavior, attempt to de-escalate through communication if safe and appropriate, and only consider further intervention, including the use of force, if the situation escalates to an imminent threat of serious harm, all while documenting the process. Option B. Ignore the individual's behavior, assuming it does not pose a direct threat to property or persons, and continue with routine patrols. Option C. Immediately approach the individual and verbally challenge them to ascertain their intentions, regardless of the immediate perceived threat level. Option D. Display your firearm prominently to deter any further erratic behavior and await further instructions from management. The correct answer is A. Observe the individual's behavior, attempt to de-escalate through communication if safe and appropriate, and only consider further intervention, including the use of force, if the situation escalates to an imminent threat of serious harm, all while documenting the process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for armed guards in Ontario, balancing the need for proactive security measures with the legal and ethical boundaries of their authority. The core difficulty lies in interpreting and applying the relevant sections of the Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, CCWExam, and its associated regulations, particularly regarding the use of force and the duty to protect. A guard must not only identify potential risks, but also determine the appropriate and lawful response, avoiding overreach or inaction. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic, documented process that prioritizes de-escalation and lawful intervention. This aligns with the CCWExam emphasis on acting within the bounds of the law and employing reasonable force only when necessary. A thorough risk assessment, as mandated by industry best practices and implicitly supported by the CCWExam requirement for responsible security provision, would involve identifying potential threats, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing a layered response strategy. This strategy would first focus on observation, communication, and de-escalation techniques. If these fail and a threat escalates to a point where immediate intervention is legally justifiable and necessary to prevent harm, then the use of force, strictly within the limits prescribed by law, e.g., Criminal Code of Canada provisions on self-defense and defense of property, would be considered. Documenting the entire process, from initial observation to any intervention, is crucial for accountability and legal protection. This methodical approach ensures that actions are proportionate, lawful, and defensible. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately confront any individual exhibiting unusual behavior, regardless of the perceived threat level. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and could lead to unnecessary escalation or even false accusations, violating the CCWExam requirement for guards to act with integrity and professionalism. Bypasses the crucial step of assessing the actual risk and potential for harm. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the presence of a firearm as a deterrent without a clear plan for its lawful and justified use. The CCWExam and the Criminal Code of Canada do not permit the display or use of a firearm simply because it is carried. Its use must be a last resort, justified by an imminent threat of serious harm. This approach risks violating regulations by creating an environment of intimidation without a lawful basis and failing to employ other, less intrusive security measures. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, assuming it is not a direct threat. While guards are not expected to intervene in every minor disturbance, a failure to assess and potentially address a situation that could reasonably escalate into a security incident could be a dereliction of duty under the CCSW, which requires licensees to provide security services diligently. This passive approach neglects the proactive element of risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and assessment. They must then consider the least intrusive lawful means to mitigate any identified risk, prioritizing de-escalation and communication. The use of force, including the firearm, should only be contemplated as a last resort when there is an imminent threat of serious harm and all other reasonable options have been exhausted or are unavailable. Documentation of all observations, assessments, and actions is paramount for accountability and legal compliance. This framework ensures that actions are always grounded in legal authority, ethical responsibility, and a commitment to public safety. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that a licensed security guard in Ontario, Canada, responding to a reported disturbance at commercial property, arrives to find signs of a struggle but no immediate physical threats. The guard's primary objective is to ensure the safety of the premises and gather information for a comprehensive incident report. Which of the following actions best reflects the professional and regulatory obligations of the guard in this situation? Option A. Secure the immediate area, observe and note the condition of the scene and any visible evidence without disturbing it, and then begin a detailed written log of observations and actions. Option B. Conduct a thorough forensic sweep of the area to identify and collect potential evidence before documenting anything. Option C. Focus solely on ensuring the perimeter is secure and wait for law enforcement to arrive and take over all aspects of the incident. Option D. Immediately begin interviewing witnesses and occupants to gather as many verbal accounts as possible before the scene is altered by anyone else. Correct answer is A. Secure the immediate area, observe and note the condition of the scene and any visible evidence without disturbing it, and then begin a detailed written log of observations and actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security professional to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the paramount duty to protect life and property. The presence of a potentially volatile situation, coupled with the need to document evidence for future investigation, demands a systematic and compliant approach. Failure to adhere to proper procedures can compromise the investigation, endanger individuals, and lead to legal repercussions for the security company and the individual guard. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing immediate safety and securing the scene, while simultaneously initiating the documentation process in a manner that does not interfere with ongoing safety operations. This approach aligns with the core principles of professional security work, which emphasize the preservation of life and evidence. Specifically, under the regulations governing licensed security professionals in Ontario, Canada, the immediate priority is to ensure the safety of all persons present and to prevent further harm. Once immediate threats are mitigated, the guard must then proceed to gather and preserve evidence. This involves making detailed notes, taking photographs or videos if safe and permissible, and securing the area to prevent contamination or loss of evidence. This methodical approach ensures compliance with the Ontario Private Security and Investigative Services Act, 2005, and its associated regulations, which mandate responsible conduct and evidence preservation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately focusing on extensive evidence collection, such as detailed interviews and forensic examination, before ensuring the scene is safe and all immediate threats are neutralized. This violates the primary duty of care to protect life and can escalate the situation, putting the guard and others at further risk. It also contravenes the regulatory expectation that safety is the absolute first priority. Another incorrect approach is to neglect evidence collection entirely, assuming that law enforcement will handle all aspects of the investigation. While law enforcement will take over the primary investigation, licensed security professionals have a responsibility to preserve initial evidence and provide a clear, factual account of events as observed. Failing to document can hinder subsequent investigations and may be seen as a dereliction of duty under Ontario's regulatory framework. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on verbal accounts without any form of written or photographic documentation. While verbal reporting is part of the process, it is prone to inaccuracies and memory lapses. The regulations implicitly encourage robust documentation to ensure accuracy and completeness, which is crucial for any subsequent legal or disciplinary proceedings. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered decision-making framework. First, assess and mitigate immediate threats to life and property. Second, secure the scene to preserve evidence. Third, initiate documentation through notes, photographs, or video, ensuring these actions do not compromise safety or the integrity of the scene. Fourth, report findings accurately and comprehensively to supervisors and, if applicable, law enforcement. This systematic process ensures both immediate safety and long-term investigative needs are met in accordance with regulatory requirements. Question 20. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential for unauthorized access to sensitive client data. A security guard in Toronto, Ontario, is tasked with assessing the financial risk associated with this vulnerability. The guard estimates there is a 15% probability of a data breach occurring within the next year. If a breach occurs, the estimated direct financial loss due to data recovery, legal fees, and regulatory fines is $200,000. Indirect losses, such as reputational damage and loss of future business, are estimated to be an additional $300,000. What is the total expected financial loss from this vulnerability? Option A, $200,000. Option B, $75,000. Option C, $150,000. Option D, $500,000. The correct answer is B, $75,000. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in risk assessment by requiring the armed guard to quantify the potential financial impact of a security breach. The difficulty lies in translating abstract security threats into concrete monetary values, which is crucial for justifying security expenditures and demonstrating due diligence to employers or clients. Accurate risk assessment is a cornerstone of effective security planning, mandated by the principles of responsible security management, and often implicitly required by licensing bodies to ensure guards are capable of contributing to a comprehensive security strategy. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves calculating the potential financial loss by multiplying the probability of a specific incident occurring by the estimated financial impact of that incident. This method, often referred to as expected monetary value (EMV), is a standard risk assessment technique. For example, if there is a 10% chance of a theft resulting in a loss of $5,000, the EMV for theft would be \0. 10 times $5,000 equals $500. This quantifiable approach allows for objective comparison of different risks and informs resource allocation decisions, aligning with the professional obligation to provide cost-effective and evidence-based security solutions. This aligns with the general expectation for licensed security professionals in Ontario to conduct thorough and justifiable risk assessments. Incorrect approaches analysis. Estimating the financial loss based solely on the guard's personal opinion of the severity of the threat, without any probabilistic analysis, is flawed. This subjective approach lacks a quantifiable basis and can lead to either over- or underinvestment in security measures, failing to meet the professional standard of objective risk evaluation. Calculating the potential financial loss by simply adding the estimated cost of each potential incident together, without considering their individual probabilities of occurrence, is also incorrect. This method inflates the perceived risk by assuming all incidents will happen simultaneously or without regard to their likelihood, leading to an unrealistic and unmanageable risk profile. Focusing only on the likelihood of an incident occurring, without quantifying the potential financial impact, provides an incomplete risk assessment. While probability is a critical component, it must be paired with the consequence, financial loss, to derive a meaningful risk value that can guide decision-making and resource allocation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by first identifying all potential threats relevant to the specific environment. Then, for each threat, they must estimate both the probability of its occurrence and the potential financial impact if it does occur. The most effective method is to use a quantitative approach, such as calculating the expected monetary value (EMV), for each risk backslash. EMV equals probability backslash times financial impact backslash. This allows for clear, data-driven prioritization of risks and informs the selection of appropriate mitigation strategies and security measures, ensuring that resources are allocated efficiently and effectively to address the most significant threats.